It's a cold case that has left the Vernon County community puzzled for nearly 3 decades. In 1984, sheriff's deputies found the body of a woman brutally murdered and abandoned on the side of a country road near Westby.
Today, her identity and her killer still remain a mystery, but investigators have never given up hope that one day they can close this case. News 8's Pauline Lee has spent the last few weeks looking into the investigation and now brings us the special series, Catching Her Killer, Justice for Jane Doe.
Well, it's what some say is as close as it gets to a perfect murder. Jane Doe's killer found what seems to be a foolproof way of hiding her identity while also leaving no traces of his own identity behind. Even after nearly 30 years, it's a case one investigator just can't seem to let go of. Once a year, retired Vernon County Deputy Sheriff Jim Hansen makes a trip to the Viroqua Cemetery.
I think the symbolism is you're essentially leaving the porch light on, and so those folks aren't forgotten.
It's a little thing he does to remember his parents, friends, people he cares about.
It's just a little one-day project for me, and I just included Jane Doe in it. I guess for 28 years I've kept hope, myself as well as many others, that maybe she can be identified and her killer found.
And it's Jane Doe's story that has kept Hansen searching for justice for nearly 3 decades.
I'm just not sure anyone deserves to die in the way this lady did. First be murdered and then left in a desolate country road with no identity. I don't think anybody deserves that.
In 1984, Hansen served as a patrol deputy for the Vernon County Sheriff's Department. He thought the night of May 4th was just going to be any other night on duty.
When the call came through dispatch, in those days there were no cell phones, there was no 911. It was, pretty much landlines. And, giving thought that car accidents were more routine in those days, thought maybe that's what it was.
3 teenagers had found a body off Old Line Road about 4 miles south of Westby. Hansen was the deputy who answered the call.
Could see the body up by pretty close to that tree up there. So I stopped right about here. Could see the U-turn in the gravel at that time. And I got out of my car and went over here and walked in the grass.
It was the body of an older woman, abandoned on the side of the road. Her head bludgeoned, her hands severed at the wrists. At the time, investigators thought Jane Doe's killer just might have committed the perfect crime.
With severed hands gone, fingerprint science was a long time science. It very likely may have been a reason that her hands were removed.
With DNA testing still emerging, trying to identify who she was became a nearly impossible task. Still, investigators did what they could to try and piece together what happened. They examined her clothes, her dentures, and tire marks in the road. Soon after, investigators determined they were looking for a man who killed Jane Doe, cut off her hands, dumped her body, and then disappeared. Then they waited for anything to point them in the right direction.
You kind of expect in those first few days that suddenly you're getting phone calls of my aunt, somebody's missing, and that didn't occur.
Soon days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Throughout the remainder of his career, Hansen and investigators worked through more than 400 leads, with all of them ending up in disappointment.
If you'd have told me 28 years ago that in 28 years you'd be taking another look at this thing, I'd have thought this would have been long solved.
Hansen retired in 2011 and now voluntarily spends his days taking another look at the case.
There's a piece of me that because I answered that call, 28 years later, it's still relatively in the same status. And now that I can focus on it, I'm just willing to volunteer and work the sciences and the evidence.
And maybe, with a second look, new technology just might be able to shine a light in the right direction.
One of my hopes is with the advent of 28 years is just maybe some young lady out there or grandson is looking for a long-lost grandma they just never had an explanation for.
And the last tip investigators received was back in 2010. Investigators were working on matching Jane Doe's case with a man in Iowa, but like the other 400 tips investigators have worked through for nearly 30 years, it still led to another dead end.
And Pauline, do investigators know anything about the killer other than he was a man?
The only lead investigators have about Jane Doe's killer is that witnesses say he may have been driving a bright yellow colored compact car, something kind of like a 1982 Datsun, the night he dumped her body. But thousands of vehicle records in the state were examined, as well as manufacturing archives. Nothing seemed to match the vehicle's description.
Thanks very much, Pauline, for that report, and tune in tomorrow night for the second part of this special two-part series to see how investigators are using today's technology to launch Jane Doe's case into cyberspace. If you have any information, call the Vernon County Sheriff's Department at this number, 608-637-2123.